Good morning, everybody, and we very much welcome you to our special interest group symposium this morning, and very excited to have you all here with us. I'm Tanya Kotia, and I'm representing the Inclusion in Education SIG, which covers all areas of inclusion. But today's session is about disability. We always value working in partnership with other SIGs and have organised several events in the past with others. But today, we're with the Higher Education SIG, some of whom are currently editing a special issue on education studies titled Challenges and Future Trends of Inclusion and Equity in Education. So we really look forward to exploring that when it is published. Today, they will also be referring to their blog, A New Ecology of Higher Education, Disability, Access, Participation and Belonging. And you will hear far more about that as we go through our morning together. We're also aiming for something else to emerge from this morning's discussions. Maybe a future collective output, maybe a publication, definitely some increase in sort of networking and finding ways to network, explore, discuss and sort of work together. We're really looking forward to having user-informed, user-created and user-evaluated change in practice, policy and theory within higher education. Okay, thinking about access, participation and belonging. We really hope to see many of you in September at our conference, and very much hope to continue these conversations and develop our debates and our work with you then. So thank you very much for coming and being with us this morning. Yes.
Good morning, everybody. Sorry, Tanya, did you want to say anything more at this point, or is it okay for Francesca and I to come in now?
I would really love Francesca and you, Sue-Ann, to continue the morning, and I will join you across the morning, and I'm sure participate in the feed out in the breakout rooms later and see.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you so much, and thank you for that clear introduction in terms of the British Education Research Association and its relevance and importance really in terms of the work we're doing here. And I'm going to say a couple of words, and then Francesca's going to say a couple of words, and then we're going to go on to hear from our wonderful speakers, and then move on to hear very much from all of you guys. So the first thing I would like to say is thank you. Thank you for being here, for taking the time to be a part of this, what I very much feel and see as an exceptionally important space. We're all working lots of hours at the minute, I feel, in all areas of education, juggling lots of balls, and to be able to commit 2 hours out of a busy day to contribute to this event, I know is quite an ask. So I'm really glad to see that so many of you have been able to do that. And as Tanya was saying, what we're really hoping to gain from this work today is to develop new ideas, new knowledge, new progressive practices from everybody's expertise and views in this space. And that's where the importance of the breakout rooms come in. So very briefly, just to give you a quick background to why we're here, how this has come about. So it really goes right back a couple of years. I've been working closely with Francesca over the last year, over the last year and a half. And that was subsequent to our involvement with research and work with Meta Westander, who's one of our speakers today. Meta leads the Disabled Students UK network, which most of you or all of you will be familiar with in this space. Now, last year and the year before, during this thing you remember called the pandemic, which we're still moving out of, and lockdowns, DS UK launched a research report and they gathered the views and the voices and the feedback of 300 plus disabled students nationwide. Now, the report is published. It's been released since March last year. It's called Going Back is Not an Option. After I've said a few words, I'm going to paste some links onto the chat, which will give you direct access to the relevant sources that I'm referring to, which will be of importance to this space, our conversations and your work going forward. So Meta and her team did this amazing piece of research, and what they discovered was that many disabled students were not experiencing, not that we're surprised, not experiencing inclusive education. They're still struggling in terms of how we position, understand, roll out and evaluate what inclusive education is. So they did the research, they did the survey, they did the launch of the report, and I was asked to speak at that event on the topic of compassion and understanding. So very much about what we understand and position as being compassion and understanding in our work with disabled students and in our higher education spaces, not just in our teaching and learning spaces, but in all the spaces and all the layers and all the nuances that make up the higher education world. So I was looking at compassion and I was looking at understanding, and I was really trying to pull out the importance of listening to disabled students around themes of inequity and themes of hope. From that launch of Meta's report and other research that Francesca's been involved in, I've been involved in, and other people in this space have been doing, Francesca and I decided to come together and work with others to develop a blog, which has also been published, and many of you will be familiar with it. Some of you have published in it, which is fantastic. So your voice is very much in there as well. And the blog is entitled A New Ecology of Higher Education, Disability Access, Participation and Belonging. So you're very much, I think, getting a sense of a theme that's straddling a lot of this work and that's connected to lots of different key stakeholders. And that's what we mean by the emphasis on a new ecology. What we're saying is that progress, practice and development around effective, fair and inclusive provision for all of our students, with a focus here around disabled students, has got to be about building on knowledge from partnerships. So it's about bringing those key voices, key partners together, key stakeholders, although I know that as a term there's a quite a challenge in terms of using the term stakeholder. So I'm preferring not to use that. So it's more working with our key experts. And in terms of our notion of ecology, what Francesca and I developed with that, what we understand by ecology is we describe it as the interconnected and entangled nature of disability as a part of higher education policy and practice that includes the following bodies. And this is where I come back again to the point that all of these key partners have a role to play in whatever evolves going forward. Following bodies are students, government policymakers, academic communities, student services, third sector organisations, charities, and other linked non-academic organisations and communities. And we believe, and from our work, I think we're experiencing it, we're seeing it, that this ecological approach can effectively shed light on the synergy that connects a variety of key partners in creating universities as inclusive spaces for disabled students and academic communities alike. So subsequent to the blog and the feedback we had conversations with the Higher Education and Inclusive Education SIG to put together this symposium, and we requested some of the papers that were published to be a part of this and to give some insight and talks on their expertise, which is why we've got Meta, Cara and Katie with us here today, and thank you, three of you, for giving your time to this. And I think the key point I just want to raise, and then I'm going to pass over to Francesca. And for me, this is what I really hang a lot of my research and my work on, is that what we are arguing for, what we are trying to evidence and what we're trying to push forward in this field and in this space with you today, and what we're hoping to learn from you, is how we co-create user-led, user-informed, and a user-evaluated inclusive higher education space. So it's about partnership, it's about collaboration, it's about understanding, and it's about really giving leadership to those key voices that should be at the front in terms of making this inclusive provision a reality in the way that it should be in terms of equal rights. So I think that's enough from me for now. Hopefully that's given you enough of an idea as to the background. And now, Francesca, over to you to take it forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Swan, and thank you everyone for being here and for making time for such an important event. To add to what Swan just said, first of all, this event is meant to be a sort of springboard for change. So following the BIRA special blog series, we put together a policy briefing that will be discussed with a member of parliament in the next month. So the experiences and the best practices and step forward that we collect in the 3 breakout rooms, those practices will inform our conversation and will be brought forward after that. So this is very important for you to know. So we have 3 presentations today. First is Mette. And after her presentation, the breakout rooms their presentation, the breakout room, will be about strategies for improving accessibility in higher education. Following Kara's presentation, the breakout room will be about students' voice and participation. And the third breakout room with Katie will be work career trajectories and inclusive work experiences. So each of us will also be taking notes during the breakout room so we can gather ideas, comments, and expertise. So I won't take any more time to our speakers. Thank you again so much for being here, and look forward for our speakers and then the discussions afterwards. Thank you. And I'll introduce Mette, who's the first one to speak.
Thank you very much. Let me just check that everyone can hear me. Okay,
Yes.
I'm getting some notes, so that's good. So yes, I'm Mette. I'm the founder of Disabled Students UK. A quick sensory description: I am a white person with an accent that's a mix of Swedish, American, and British English. I have usually transcripts. Captions are quite good on Teams, but I have a transcript if anyone would like it after this talk as well. Yeah, just let me know if anyone has any particular access needs that that I can take into consideration, and do let me know if I need to slow down as well. So as we've already kind of touched on, in 2021, Disabled Students UK sent out a survey receiving more than 300 responses from disabled students across the UK. And that really provided us with incredibly rich data concerning how disabled students have experienced the pandemic. In particular, we were inspired by the answers to the last question in our survey. What lessons do you hope that your university learns from the pandemic to become more accessible moving forward? Based on the answers, we created the report Going Back is Not a Choice, where we highlighted 5 key lessons to guide higher education providers on how they can move forward toward a more inclusive higher education provision. The pandemic has demonstrated that higher education has an enormous untapped potential for accessibility. By forcing universities to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances, the pandemic encouraged them to develop capacities such as online teaching, which might otherwise have taken a decade. The challenge now is not sliding backwards, but rather building on this momentum to create a higher education sector that is accessible, whether you're autistic, going through cancer treatment, or are a full-time carer. So I want to quickly go through each of these lessons in turn, and then I'll start discussing the question that I'd like us to talk more on in the breakout room. So lesson 1, let me actually copy these into the chat so everyone has them in front of them. Lesson 1 is taking an anticipatory approach. In some ways, accessibility improved during the pandemic, largely due to a few institution-wide policies, such as online access to lectures and removing time limits from assessments. Many students with fatigue or auditory processing issues, for instance, have had a level of access that they'd never experienced before. 85% of disabled students in our survey reported that they would benefit from online learning being an option for them after the pandemic. This really shows the enormous influence of a few key universal policies applied equally to disabled and non-disabled students. Taking an anticipatory approach to find and implement such policies going forward will allow higher education providers to increase accessibility more efficiently. Just checking the chat. All good. Cool. Lesson 2, resourcing staff to be able to provide accessible education. There was a lack of individualized disability support during the start of the pandemic and a failure to incorporate accessibility into the delivery of institution-wide policies. Only 23% of the disabled students surveyed agreed that they had received the disability support they required during this time. This really emphasizes the need for staff to have the appropriate resources and training to be able to implement accessibility in practice. Lesson 3, building on compassionate attitudes. Many universities implemented more flexible and compassionate policies for their students at the start of the pandemic. For instance, regarding extensions, demonstrating that such approaches do not have to come at the expense of academic rigor. Considering that disabled students face challenging circumstances during non-pandemic times as well, students in our survey wish to see such policies applied beyond the pandemic to a disability-specific context. Lesson 4, reducing the administrative burden. At the start of the pandemic, many disabled students were asked to provide evidence anew in order to receive adjustments for online learning. These students were almost 3 times less likely to have the support they needed a year into the pandemic. This provides a kind of natural experiment, a clear example of the fact that when disabled students have to shoulder a large administrative burden, this effectively blocks their access to education on equal terms. Reducing the administrative burden is one of the most cost-effective ways to increase accessibility for disabled students. Lesson 5, take responsibility for disabled students' access through effective leadership. Disabled students have been asking for accommodations like lecture recordings for years before the pandemic, and yet it wasn't until abled students needed them that they were put in place. The survey results paint a picture of disabled students being consistently forgotten while able students are accommodated. Only 8% of disabled students felt that their institution had prioritized making their course accessible. Several of our participants instead stated that disabled students had felt like an afterthought before and during the pandemic. The only way to ensure that accessibility is prioritized going forward is through competent leadership, which enables a coherent whole institution approach and a culture of responsibility. When disabled students are so systematically forgotten, we have to look at the structures of responsibility within institutions. Unfortunately, most of the institutions that we work with do not have a full-time role, which includes ultimate responsibility for accessibility within that institution. And yet, such a position is absolutely crucial for the university to be able to take responsibility for accessibility. This could be an accessibility lead within disability services who oversees not just that department, but accessibility within the university as a whole. Or someone who works with the university risk register who understands disability law. The important thing is that they have the responsibility to set accessibility goals and the authority to coordinate staff across departments. Only with coordination and accountability will the institution be able to course correct when something is not accessible. Before finishing, I just want to quickly address one more lesson that universities need to understand in order to be able to create a more accessible institution going forward. We weren't able to fit it properly into the report, but it was actually the second most common lesson students who filled in our survey wanted universities to learn, and that's to consult disabled students. When we work with universities, we find this enormous insight gap. Staff may think that they will automatically find out if something isn't accessible, but unfortunately that's unlikely. When disabled students aren't provided with sufficient support, it means that they have to put that much more time and effort into their education than the average student. So they're less likely to be able to dedicate time to making complaints or advocating via the student union. The consequence is that universities lack insight into the disabled student experience unless they actively pursue it. Students who were proactively consulted about accessibility when teaching methods changed due to the pandemic were 3 times more likely in our survey to have the support that they needed and more than 3 times less likely to consider leaving their university. That's why the SUK has created the annual Disabled Student Survey, which is currently being promoted for the first time to connect institutions with the insight of their disabled students. All universities who promote the survey enough to gain a sufficient number of respondents will be able to see a snapshot of the disabled student experience at their institution to understand the areas of strength and where they need to do more work. We're hoping that this will enable universities to better understand good practice and thus improve accessibility in a more proactive and cost-effective way. This survey will provide a valuable tool for insight, and universities that become members of the project are able to gain even more such tools. But we know insight then has to be applied by university leadership, which leads me to the question that I'd like us to discuss in our breakout group. I've talked about the importance of having leadership structures which allow institutions to take responsibility for accessibility. But what does this look like in practice within institutions? To have structures which enable the institution to take an anticipatory approach, to understand the law and the disabled student experience, to set, resource, and enforce accessibility goals institution-wide, and to regularly evaluate accessibility. What are the structures that would allow this? Should this responsibility fall on the EDI team, who tend to currently be more focused on the staff experience? Should it fall under the disability services team, who at the moment tend to be more focused on individualized adjustments? Or should it fall under a variety of teams, such as digital services and estates, or pedagogy training? And if so, how do we ensure a unified approach? Creating the correct structures to take responsibility for accessibility is key, and I'm curious to hear how you think that this can be done. Okay, I'm looking forward to the breakout room, but I'm going to put both a link to the survey in the chat and the question that I have for the breakout room. So first the survey, and then my email address in case anyone wants to get in touch, and finally the question for the breakout room. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mette, for such an insightful presentation. Now the floor is to Cara. Thank you.
Thank you. I have got a presentation, so I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully that will come up. If I could just have a yes, Francesca, if you can see it when that comes through. That's great. Fabulous. Thank you. I'll just put myself. I'm going to leave it like that, actually. I was going to change it, but you all know it decides to move about if I change it to full screen, as long as that's okay as it is. So hello everyone, my name's Cara and I'm from the University of Plymouth. In the bottom corner of all of my slides, I've got the University of Plymouth logo, which is a shield with a few shells and stars inside. Just for a quick visual description, I'm a white female with blonde hair and I'm wearing a red top today. I'm here to talk about a blog that I co-wrote with some of my fabulous colleagues at the University of Plymouth in the peer learning team about an example of what we feel is best practice and has been evidenced as being best practice through different examples, talking about this space that we've created called the Writing Cafe and how it's facilitating accessibility for disability through aspects of mutuality and empowerment for and with students. So just a brief overview for those of you that aren't familiar with what I'm talking about. The Writing Cafe is a space that is student-led, managed by the peer learning team, but student writing mentors run the space. The point of the Writing Cafe is for student writing mentors to support students seeking support to work on and build academic writing together. Now, writing mentors can be from any discipline with a range of experience from second year to undergraduate, from undergraduate to PhD. This means that there's such a wealth of knowledge and experience. Writing mentoring is interdisciplinary, so whilst I'm an education student, I might be supporting someone from nursing, someone from geography, and that's the way that the space works. This has lots of benefits and lots of different ways that we work together, which I'm going to talk through in this presentation. It's been operating since 2014 at the University of Plymouth, and it was founded by someone called Christy Pritchard and Helen Bosted, who really wanted to build upon this notion of the writing cafes and the way that people and students can go and work together. So some writing mentors receive some additional training to support students, and this just values the knowledge that students have and how we can best work collaboratively to support each other. Just for quick context and building upon what Meta has talked about, disabled students make up 1/5 of home students within higher education, but have been traditionally excluded from participating, evidenced by pre-pandemic and post-pandemic experiences. As such, higher education and academia can be really difficult for some people to navigate, despite increases in calls for access and participation for disabled students. And this is because of access to resources, the way assessments are shaped, the way the nature of higher education itself is shaped. It's not been shaped with disabled students in mind. So this can inhibit students from accessing support or feeling fully confident, familiar, or having a great experience within higher education. Things we wanted to highlight in our blog was about creating the conditions for inclusion and how the Writing Cafe was created with inclusion in mind. So it's a developmental creative space outside of academic norms. And it's about highlighting that this is an active choice to be inclusive. Inclusive and accessible design, it doesn't just happen. We must actively and powerfully determine that this is what we want to do. So our current hybrid offer, so currently the Writing Cafe operates digitally and physically as a post-pandemic outcome, and it reflects an intentional shift into the accessibility despite some higher education institutions wanting to settle back into face-to-face teaching. What I do want to highlight is pre-pandemic, the Writing Cafe was a physical space only, and of course that highlights considerations as to why this wasn't identified before. And it's excellent to acknowledge that we have taken that step forward to acknowledge how this digital offer is really vital too. So since 2021, we've been offering a hybrid delivery service after the COVID instigated an online only offer, which was incredibly successful. While offering online provision only, disabled student engagement was about 15.6% within 2021, but when offering both provisions, engagement was 27.6% for disabled students. And this is only continually increasing, reflecting how both a physical provision and a digital provision are vital for supporting students and our disabled students, because what might work for one student might not work for another. It's been recognised as an example of best practice during the pandemic by the Gravity Assist report. Being online provides many accessible benefits, as well as camera off options for students who might feel a bit more uncertain or unsure, and access to campus and different things. And the physical location is in the library, which is a student-led space. And it's really important that this is in a student-led space because students have ownership of it and feel and are more likely to feel that this is their space and feel more comfortable within it. It's part of a central hub where very few academics would meander through. It's not to say that they won't, but students are there in the space and students come seeking support. So it's really about this peer-to-peer connection for student writing mentors and the students seeking support. So that was to pull on our intentional design for accessibility, learning lessons from the pandemic through the work that we've done with students and through reports like the one that Disabled Students UK have done too. Thinking pedagogically, and this was something we highlighted in the report in our blog too. Student to student is so powerful, a knowledge creation and a knowledge exchange where both parties bring value. So as an education student who is a writing mentor, I can provide some academic insight into how to develop writing, but what I can't do is bring that nursing specific knowledge that a student seeking support has. So what this really does is challenges this deficit and hierarchical approach in academia where lecturers have the knowledge and students need to take the knowledge from lecturers. It's building those two together, emphasising student participation and the value of their voice. And these peer-to-peer spaces feel safer, at least from my experience. There's a comfort to be vulnerable, intrigued, stressed, or happy, where that you might feel less observed. And by empowering students as the expert in their subject, we hope that they feel more empowered to take ownership of their work and the way that they seek support. And hopefully it feels their space and this knowledge creation is happening together. Some things that are really important when thinking about students' voice and participation. Writing mentors are paid. Now, whether you're a second year student or whether you're a PhD student, you are paid to be a writing mentor. And this is a key consideration for us. Paying students ensures representation of different students. For example, so we have some neurodivergent and disabled writing mentors. Therefore, our disabled and neurodivergent students can see themselves in the space and see how they might be able to participate in something like this. And how higher education is not shaped just for one specific type of person, as it might have been throughout decades and decades of the way that higher education has been shaped and built together. What it really highlights as well is the importance of student-to-student spaces outside of lectures and programme activity. So for me, I know that I've been timetabled student-led experiences by my lecture activity. And this might still have a way of shaping this hierarchical. This is something that we want you to do. But by removing that and having the Writing Cafe open Monday to Friday, 1 till 4, both digitally and physically, so all week presence, students can drop in as and when suits them and make this space suit them. And as in turn, hopefully it enhances the aspect of belonging. And we found in the pandemic that perhaps the engagement increased because this was a space, an informal space where students could discuss together and seek support during such an uncertain time and moving forward in both of those spaces. Just to draw to a close here, spaces like the Writing Cafe provide opportunities for student voice, not just for writing mentors to do that, but for students seeking support too, and how our disabled students may feel more familiar and confident to access peer-to-peer work. It values the contributions that our disabled students have and encouraging them to take ownership of their work, sharing what they do know, and then building on that together. Not just bringing students in, but encouraging success and retention of students whilst they're here too. And just to draw to my discussion prompts, I put a few up here just so that it gives us a couple of options. But what role do student-led spaces and student participation have within higher education? The Writing Cafe supports all students with a specific impact being had on underrepresented groups. Do we need spaces that support all or spaces that are specifically tailored? How can we create and encourage participation from disabled students? What are the core ingredients? And there are some other writing cafes with writing mentors as volunteers, not employees. What are the implications of this? Thank you, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Cara. Again, sorry, I appreciated earlier on when I was speaking, I was on mute. So thank you, Francesca, for taking the connection after Meta's talk and introducing Cara. So I just want to say again, another brilliant, inspiring input from one of our three speakers. I think it's given me a lot to think about, and I'm really looking forward to the conversations we're going to have in our breakout rooms. So if I can just ask the speakers to maybe remind the group when you go into your breakout rooms of the key questions that you summarise at the end of your talk, and that can help structure the discussion. Our next speaker is Katie Stote, and I'm very happy to introduce Katie, and she's going to talk about her work in relation to today's topic of new ecology in higher education. Over to you, Katie. Thank you.
Thank you. I also have some slides. I'm just going to share my screen. Right, hopefully that has come up. Can you see that's okay?
Yes, it's all there. It's all there, Katie. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a real fear, isn't it? Hello, everyone. My name's Katie Stote. I'm an employability and placements advisor at the University of Exeter. Just to give a bit of a visual description, I'm a white female. My pronouns are she, her. I have dark hair that's currently pulled up in a ponytail, and I'm wearing clear frame glasses, and I have like a dark blue and white check dress. with quite a big collar. I'm really excited to be here today. It's been so fantastic hearing all about the important work and real insights in this area, and I'm really looking forward to speaking to you all further in the breakout rooms. So today I'm discussing inclusive work experiences and disabled students' work career trajectories, specifically around the importance of creating space for the student voice within employability or professional development provisions. And this is really building on the BERA blog piece that was co-written with 3 students I was fortunate enough to work with as consultants on a project co-developing inclusive e-learning resources that were designed to support disabled and neurodiverse students to really engage with placements, internships, and similar professional development opportunities. And just as a bit of context, this project was undertaken as part of my previous role working on the University of Plymouth's Research England and Offers for Students funded project, engaging students in knowledge exchange, where we were really seeking to identify and create interventions for the barriers that were preventing students from engaging in knowledge exchange projects. And just for those who are unfamiliar with student knowledge exchange, it's very similar to kind of placements and internships, but there's a really distinct focus on the student having just as much value to provide to the organisation that they are working with through their kind of skills and lived experience as that organisation provides to them. And I just really wanted to highlight today that what I will be discussing is hopefully a real jumping off point for us to delve into further discussion in the breakout session. And I'm really keen to kind of continue to develop my understanding and continue to learn through the kind of discussions we will have today and hopefully beyond today as well. So I just wanted to start by highlighting some really kind of key statistics to provide a bit of context on the current landscape for disabled and neurodiverse students' kind of career trajectories. So the UK's Higher Education Statistic Agency, HESA, shared in their 2022 report that from the 2019-2020 academic year, that graduates with a known disability have statistically lower graduate outcomes than their neurotypical and non-disabled peers, with an 8% disparity in the number of students in full-time employment. And as has been already mentioned today, there's a rapid increase in the number of students attending university and disclosing a disability year on year, which is brilliant. And we're up 47% in 2021 since the 2014-2015 academic year. And with that, it's really critical that university practitioners such as myself and a lot of us in the room today, we really critically review the accessibility of our employability provisions and opportunities that are being provided for students. So what kind of needs to change? Research on this suggests that there's not enough being done to really effectively support disabled and neurodivergent students transition into graduate employment. And that's starting with placements and internships and really continuing through to the graduation into the labour market. And one example that I wanted to pull out today is a quote from Vincent's 2020 study on the employability of UK university students and graduates with autism, which states participants described how careers professionals did not always understand the particular needs that they had as autistic students and made an assumption that the same information or approach provided for neurotypical students would also be suitable for them. For me, this quote really epitomizes the importance of creating the space for disabled and neurodiverse students to really share their lived experiences in a way that is meaningful and ensures that the students have equity in shaping the provisions that are designed to support them, rather than taking a blanket approach and assuming one size fits all. So as I mentioned at the start, in my previous role, we undertook a paid consultation with a cohort of disabled and neurodivergent students to better understand what resource and support was required to enable these students to engage with key professional development opportunities. And while this consultation really started with a focus on developing e-learning resources, through creating the space for the students to have their voices and experiences heard, the consultation really provided critical insights into how we needed to adapt or completely overhaul our provisions to ensure that all students were able to access and meaningfully engage with the same opportunities. I just really wanted to share a few of the insights that the students provided during the consultation. So one student, or actually a few students, highlighted the importance of explaining reasonable adjustments. So one student in particular identified how when they were asked in an interview what reasonable adjustments the employer could make to actually support that student in their role, the student actually began to panic because reasonable adjustments had never been explained to them in a professional context before. Therefore, they didn't know what adjustments would enable them to feel more supported in the role and panicked because they didn't know how to answer that question. There's also an emphasis on the importance of relatable speakers, with a particular note on the value of seeing or hearing from someone that they can really relate to in very aspirational roles. And finally, the students identified how they really find it difficult to align themselves with job criteria. Therefore, understanding how their unique lived experiences can be utilised in an application or interview was also something that was identified to be of real value. So ensuring that students have equity in the decisions, opportunities and resources that impact them is absolutely key. I'm really interested to discuss this further in the breakout discussion, but in practice, some of the approaches that we have taken to meaningfully work with disabled and neurodivergent students in a way that is beneficial for everyone has been through paid consultations, as I previously mentioned. So ensuring that students are paid an hourly rate or agreed rate for their time, positioning the student as the expert on their lived experience. Working with student representatives from the Students' Union, but I really want to emphasise here it's so important that we make sure that that work operates within the capacity and the remit of their role, rather than taking advantage and asking them to work beyond the remits of their role within the Student Union. And in terms of recruitment, one thing we found really beneficial was actually reaching out to relevant student societies with the opportunities to get involved in co-development through sharing information with trusted members of staff. As a lot of students we reached out to within the societies already had a real interest in creating positive change. So I know I've mentioned this a lot, but it really is so important that anytime we work with students, the value that they bring to that collaboration is actively acknowledged and not exploited. So again, I'm really keen to discuss this further in the breakout discussion, but for me, this has meant really respecting that their time is valuable. So as much as possible through both financial and verbal recognition, paying students for their time, but also really actively acknowledging the value of their contribution and lived experiences within that dynamic. Asking for students' capacity and being aware to not overstep that boundary. And when changes have been implemented as a result of their suggestion, really try to keep them informed about the changes that they have created. So building on the previous consultation, I'm actually now undertaking further research into disabled and neurodivergent students' experiences and perceptions of professional development opportunities, in particular placements and internships, to really identify what is working well within the sector and what is working less well, so that we can really continue to kind of develop and improve the provisions we provide to all students. As well as this, I will also be researching the experiences and perceptions of university staff supporting these provisions to identify their understanding of the barriers and benefits to students who are disabled and neurodiverse participating in these opportunities. If you'd be interested in participating in this research as a student or a member of staff, I will share both the student and staff survey in the chat. It's super short, but I'm really keen to gain as much kind of perspectives, as many perspectives on this kind of really important topic as possible. If you'd like to find out more or continue the conversation beyond today, please do reach out to me. My email address is on the screen. I'll also pop it on the link. I'll pop the link in the chat. So as I mentioned at the start, the aim for this talk is very much to be a jumping off point for the group discussions. So one question I would really be keen to begin with, and I've kind of built in a few different points around this, but I think there's just so much about it. So I'd really like to discuss how can we meaningfully engage disabled and neurodiverse students in the development of professional development opportunities and provisions. So I want to hear, your experiences, considerations, challenges, and then really about ensuring students have equity in that decision-making process. And I will copy and paste this in the chat as well. Here's some references. Always nice to see. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie. That was brilliant. Again, another excellent speaker in terms of giving us something to consider moving forward around the conversation of new ecology and making change happen in our relevant and connected spaces in HE. We were just a little bit over time. We want to have a bit of space now for some Q&A. So I think we've got enough time for maybe 2 or 3 questions tops. Francesca, what do you think?
Yes, absolutely. We have a break at 11, so
yeah,
go to questions.
Okay, And I think just looking through the chat, I mean, it's been really great to see people have been engaging all the way through the talk in the chat and giving some feedback and thoughts. We're going to save the chat, Tanya. I'm hoping that you or your colleague can help with that so that the chat can be shared with everybody afterwards. And I appreciate that 1 or 2 people have had to leave due to an urgent meeting, but we will be sending the recording through to all delegates as well. But obviously it's very important, if you can, to stay with us throughout so that we can really learn from each other and have a rich conversation in the breakout rooms as well. Okay, so over to questions. I didn't come across any questions in the chat as such as we were going through, so I think it's really to ask delegates to speak up, to let us know, or to put something in the chat if they have a particular question and who they want to direct that question to, please.
There is a little icon at the top of the page as well if you want to raise your hand rather than just call out as well.
Yes, thank you.
Feel free to do so.
I think if I can come in with a quick one then, and then hopefully that might spark other people to contribute as well, or to think of other related questions. Meta, you talked about what does this actually look like? What does it look like in practice to have these structures where we can have students perhaps in a full-time role as a disability representative working through the Students' Union, working across the university, where we can work with teams like the EDI team or the Disability Services team or the digital team or estates. How do we take things forward in practice? And can I just ask you, and I put some links into the chat of examples of tools and ways in which we can move it forward in relation to Disability Students UK's Access Insights work. So there's a link to that for those of you who are interested in that. But in terms of what it actually looks like in practice, do you have any sense from your research, Meta, your conversations with colleagues internationally as well as nationally, on what that actually looks like and how we can take it forward? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, obviously, I think a key thing that we're finding in our research is the importance of whoever is in charge of accessibility university-wide, having the remit to consider accessibility in a anticipatory fashion. So setting goals not just for individual adjustments, but more anticipatory approaches in areas such as the physical environment, in areas such as teaching accessibility and so on. At the moment, there tend to be projects in those areas that are very disconnected. And we really need, as I said, a whole institution approach that is able to take a more proactive stance. So I think that's part of it. Another part that we're often seeing is disability services often don't have the authority to really enforce adjustments that they know. They're often the ones with most knowledge of disability law, and so they realize perhaps that this is this accommodation, for instance, is necessary, is legally required, but they don't have the authority to actually tell academics actually you need to do this isn't an option. So that's another part, I think, having the authority to actually enforce these accessibility adjustments. A third thing that is very important for this body or this group of this team to have is being able to really take a coherent and whole institution approach. So bringing together, I talked about all the different parts of the university that are really involved in accessibility, and they need to be able to work together to make this happen. Those are a few of the things I think we need to see one body take responsibility for. And it's just a question of, okay, who actually is going to take that responsibility, and how do we design them so that they are able to do all those things?
Okay. Thank you, Meta. That's just added a little bit more, I think, layers and nuance and insights into the key point you're making, because that's difficult, isn't it? We know what we want to do. We have an idea as to how we think it might happen, but how do we actually then drive it forward? Who actually takes the lead? Who takes the reins? And how do we ensure that that notion of disability voice, disabled students' voice is core and leading it? I've just seen there's been a couple of more questions that have come in since we started the Q&A. Felicity has one here. And I think this is for you, Katie. Felicity's asking on the chat, I don't know if you can see it, I'll read it. Do you have any examples of what your careers and placements team have been doing to make the services more appropriate for disabled students? What e-learning examples, and what was the biggest change that was needed to be more inclusive? So there's kind of maybe 2 or 3 different questions in that. So it's examples of what you're doing, actual practical examples, and how you've, what was the most significant change that was needed for a more inclusive space in your field? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Yes, so one of the biggest things that really jumped out at me was the students had identified there was a bit of a gap. So you have, the disabled student services, which was very much around supporting students, as Meta said, on that kind of individual adjustments, and very much in the academic space. And you had career services, but there didn't seem to be an overlap. So some students identified that they were actually being bounced from one team to the other because they weren't, I suppose no one had that training, as you've identified, to actually feel that they could provide specific careers advice for disabled and neurodivergent students, and understanding what nuances there were with that. And again, like going back to that quote I shared earlier, there was that assumption that what was already there just worked, but it absolutely didn't. So what we did was we kind of created an entire e-learning pathway. So that really was, we started with that foundation, then the consultants project with the students really then helped to shape and build that. So we were creating resources such as kind of like worksheets with prompts, so including things like job descriptions, so key transferable skills that you might find in an internship job description or graduate level one. And then some examples of how their lived experiences could actually work to demonstrate that they align with those characteristics that are being identified. In the University of Exeter, things that I've actually acknowledged, I've been in the University of Exeter about 6 months now. Within my specific placements team, we've been looking at things like the actual appointment space. The physical space has been completely changed. So one of my colleagues sometimes has to use a wheelchair. So we've had to reshape the whole space so that 2 wheelchairs can fit into that space if a student in a wheelchair wanted to actually come in and have a face-to-face appointment. Of course, we have the online appointments as well, but it's really important that that opportunity is provided for a physical space interaction as well. And other things we've been doing around is longer appointments. So traditionally, the appointments have been 20 minutes, but that may not be enough time for all students to be able to communicate in the way that they would like to. So we've created longer appointments. There's been one student who specifically was interested in doing a placement. They were really concerned that because of their chronic fatigue syndrome, they wouldn't be able to do full-time hours, full working week. So we really worked with the employer to negotiate what that could look like. So for students, they have to meet a specific requirement as part of, if they were doing a placement as part of their degree. So looking at how can we reshape what that looks like, but that's on that very kind of individual basis. So there's kind of the broader, and this is across 2 universities as well, because it's quite interesting. I'm kind of straddling both in some ways. So yeah, there's that kind of broader stuff, but there's quite a few different examples. I won't kind of take over today, but yeah, if you want to find out more, then, and I'd be great to hear more from other people as well. Just send me an email.
Thank you, Katie. I kind of got the sense from that as that was a really, really good overview breakdown with really clear examples that I think most people here will connect with, or it will link into what we're talking, what they're talking about, what they're bringing into the space. And I kind of felt that what you're talking about here is the importance for the student to be the lead in terms of what the need is and what needs to change. So again, very much giving voice and power and authority to that key person, making sure that the communication channels are working effectively, and also being very open to making change happen, saying we'll find a way to make this change happen in order to be the accessible, fully inclusive space legally we need to be, we're supposed to be, and we want to be. So that's really good. So it's about leading, communication and change. Thank you, Katie. We've another quick question here. Well, it's more maybe a comment. Karen, Karen, you write that your research is focused on teacher confidence within secondary schools, and I wonder if it is the same within higher education. Lack of training for teachers both during PGC courses and teacher training events have been a contributing factors. If higher education staff have no personal lived experience of disability, we need to ensure training is given, otherwise how do they know what to do? Now I have some thoughts on that, but I think I've said enough, so I'm going to open it up for other people to come back, because it's a very important point and a very relevant one. And I'm sure that many of you, other people in this space, will have done some exceptional research in this area around continuing professional development and also the legal requirements for HE staff. Francesca.
First one, if I interrupt you, but it's 11 and I think it's time for the break, even though we have more questions. So maybe we can keep the questions either for the breakout rooms or for the discussion afterwards.
Okay.
If everyone is fine with that.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll do that. So we're going to take 10. We'll be taking 15 minutes. 15 minutes, and then we'll go to the and then we'll come back from the coffee break and into the breakout rooms. So just hang on to that point. If any of you have something to share, because I think it's really important around CPD for HE staff, we'll bring that back to the wider discussion at the end of the session. Okay, thank you, folks.
And please just mute and close your cameras. Don't leave the meeting. That would make things easier for everyone. Thank you so much.
So I think what would be really good to do now is to hear from each of the breakout rooms in terms of the key themes, ideas that were being shared, and examples of best practice that we can take forward. So I'm just going to look to Cara's group, because you're the face here in front of me that I see on all the lovely faces in front of me. You're the one that's come out number one on the list here. So if you'd like to share a summary and or perhaps whoever was working with you in that group, I think it was Tanya, maybe to share what was discussed, what's worthy for us to consider in this space now. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think both Tanya and I were making some notes throughout, so I just wanted to thank those of us in the group and everyone for such rich discussion, and actually we could have gone on for ages talking about these things. So yeah, special thanks to Tanya, Leah, Jodie and Julie for the conversations that we were having. Again, lots of us we were talking about first talking about the Writing Cafe and how thinking about some of these student spaces are not overly resource heavy and actually quite easy to implement if you use the right language when talking to the budget holders and those sorts of things. But it's about positioning these ways of working in these schemes and these student spaces as vital importance, taking the evidence that we have about these spaces and saying these are needed for students because we can widen the door to come into the universities as much as possible. But if we're not improving what's inside the universities, experiences and participation and feelings of belonging are just not going to be fostered unless we do something about it and encourage these spaces. Another thing we were drawing on is individually we're using a lot of our personal resource as a band-aid to mask what the DfE aren't doing, the government aren't doing, those higher up in some of our institutions perhaps aren't doing. And we all do really important work, but it's about challenging the DfE and providing solutions and thinking about how we can encourage this. But again, we didn't have an exact solution, and I think it's constantly thinking about moving the conversation forward and continuing to rally together and build those connections through these discussion groups and onwards, and make sure that this is becoming a priority, not just for us, but for other people. We were again talking about reasonable adjustments being this bare minimum that institutions have to provide, and we wish we could challenge the language, and we continue to do ourselves, challenge the language of that and providing spaces that are there already. We're not adapting each specific thing for a student to come in, making them the burden, applying that deficit and medical model lens onto them, but making sure that we've got these provisions in place already so that students can access them. Of course, for any real specific needs, we can continue to adapt and adjust, but making sure that we have spaces already that can cater to some of these things. So students might feel less belonging because higher education hasn't been positioned for them. Okay, how can we ensure we've got the right kinds of groups for that? Students might not feel as familiar with academic language. Okay, what services do we have to ensure that they can access support for that? And just continuing thinking about, making sure that we're doing the right things with the resources, and looking beyond the tick box. And those are some of the notes that I had. I don't know if Tanya wanted to build upon anything else.
So thank you for that. That was an incredibly thorough summary there, Cara, and I was beginning to panic, thinking I'm going to have to find something to say. But actually, we also spoke about actually the real value in understanding people as people, really getting to know who they are, not necessarily thinking about, oh, this is you and we need to do this and we need to do that for you, but actually this is you, and actually if we do this, it's going to help everybody. And just as Cara sort of said, if there's anything specific that you need, we can kind of work with that. We spoke about, as Cara said, lots of things already being in place, and it's just about developing that or making that more common across every institution that is working with our sort of young people, our adults, and everybody else. But with along those understanding people, it's actually understanding the impact of COVID, really, and all the sort of teaching and learning that went on during that, not just whilst we still remember what that lockdown was and kind of how it kind of felt and the changes that we made then, but thinking about this, going back to our children that have, were born during COVID and the years that they've missed, moving through the whole of their education sort of experience. So, our babies are, missed a lot of social interactions. So how's that going to develop, and how are they going to maybe pick up those skills, or how will those skills look different by the time they reach us in 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 odd years time? The children that didn't transition from primary schools into secondary and go through that traditional experience of being the top dog in one place and having an amazing time and going on those school trips, having that wonderful summer holiday, which gives you that sense of, I don't quite know where I belong because I've left primary and I've started secondary, but I don't really know what it is. And that's starting as that small little person in a new environment and getting to understand what it's like to make new friends and experience a bigger environment, meet all these other adults that are, have all this power over you, and sort of developing in that way. So actually, if they stay in their schools until through sixth form, what does that mean as they leave schools and come and join us? The children that are joining us very, very soon, that perhaps missed out on all the GCSEs, so their first exams that have been marked by external people are their A-levels and their current exams that they're doing now. So what is the impact of that? How do they feel sort of moving forward? So actually, we're really thinking long term here, and we're not necessarily thinking about a traditional view of disability and special educational needs, where we might be looking at autism and neurodiversity or dyslexia or specific physical disabilities or anything else, but actually all the sort of mental well-being things and impacts of a whole range of other things that don't traditionally fit within our cycle. But lots of our students are coming in and potentially coming in with a wider range of issues, and not just those we're used to. You're on mute, Suan.
God, keep going on mute. This is so annoying.
I know. You would think we'd know by now.
Thank you. No, Lord Almighty. Thank you. That sort of comes back to some of the points that were raised in our group as well. So yeah, thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Cara. Can I pass over to Francesca and Meta now, just to summarise put out some key themes, ideas around exceptional practice that works in the area that you were talking about, or other ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Swan. I don't think we really share best practices. We shared mostly experiences and ideas and ways of stepping forward, where to focus on making actual change. So that really informed the discussion. So first of all, I want to thank Felicity, Indy, Beth, Alison, and Christina, and Mette, obviously, for this super rich discussion. We were a quite diverse group, which really helped to also gather in different perspectives. And I think in our discussion, what mostly struck us was the non-systematic approach that there's to inclusion and disability in higher education. So it was picked up the fact that we always talk about pockets of best practices that stays in specific departments, that don't have the authority to make the change, and also they are not allocated resources enough to make the change. So stemming from that, we acknowledge how the culture of accountability is taking over in a way the moral of inclusion, and how it should be embedded in an ethical way in what is done in higher education, and prior to that and beyond that, following the idea of the ecology of higher education. So we talked about the factual versus the more compassionate approach. And let me go back to the notes. A very important point was raised about how Wales does things differently. So I don't know, Alison, if you want to tap in, if you're comfortable with that, and mentioning something about Wales, because that is something that maybe can be of interest to everyone.
I could just say a few words. I mean, Wales is a very small higher education sector. We have a different regulator from England, which is about to change. But in our fee and access plans, there are targets we have to meet about recruitment and retention of underrepresented groups, including disabled students. We benefit from the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in Wales, which is quite unusual, which binds public sector bodies like HEIs to demonstrate how they're supporting that act to benefit communities, benefit society. You've got to map everything you do against it. So I think for me, this gives me levers. I manage an Academy of Inclusivity at Swansea University to push is the word I want to use. I probably shouldn't say that. Push the university to meet its ethical obligations.
Thank you. And following on that, and the idea of evidence and gathering evidence, and how it is important to make change in the framework in which we are living at the moment, but how this evidence is always gathered either by groups like Disabled Student UK or by disabled student officers that are not paid to do so. So evidence is very important. That is something that should be embedded institutionally to make the change and to make the whole university culture inclusive. Another point that we touched that was very important was about talking about disabled staff as well, both academic staff that is definitely more insightful and able to enact an inclusive pedagogy. But that is hardly the case because not many staff in academia are self-identified as disabled, which is another big problem in the ecology, obviously. And secondly, also in the different departments. Even the departments that actually deal with disability well-being, disability provisions, not many of the employees self-identify as disabled as well. So it's about having disabled people in positions of authority and of power. And then lastly, we touched upon the changes through pedagogical practices and how they actually benefit through universal design or culturally relevant pedagogies at the intersection, disability at the intersection with different social markers, how they benefit the whole class instead of benefiting just disabled students. So that's another important point to bear in mind in building inclusive higher education institutions. Tell me, group, please, if I have forgotten something or if you want to add something. Okay, thank you.
I know. I was muted. It's become a theme today, isn't it? I'm saying thank you, Francesca. Thank you, Meta. Thank you, your group. And really good to hear what arose from your discussions. It's really interesting because I think there's a connection and an overlap in terms of some of the themes that were discussed in all three groups. And Katie, in terms of our group, can I turn to you to maybe pull out some of the key things? And I've got some notes here, but you were speaking very clearly at the end of our meet earlier, and I just would like to jump back into the points that you were raising at that point, because I think they summarized really a lot of what we had picked up around co-creation, around CPD, around attitudes, around cultural change, around universal design, and the graduate employability work that you're doing.
Yeah, so there was so much to kind of like
Yeah.
say pull out of our chat. So we had Karen, Anne and Sophie in ours, and it was so great to hear your insights. And we were really trying to kind of, well, I think it was amazing because we all had such a diverse kind of experience to draw from. And yeah, so some of the things, I think the biggest thing that kind of jumped out at me, and this is what I kind of said at the end, was it is the changes that are required. It is a completely, like you said, it is that complete ecology. It's the individual, you know, how as individuals, you know, that training that's required, the CPD, as you mentioned, and what responsibilities do staff have as individuals, but then also looking at, you know, the institutional level, the policy level, the societal level. Like, it's so micro and macro that it's, you know, I think everything kind of needs stripping back, and that's generally like a real key theme that came out, I think, across all of the experiences that were shared in our group. It was such a rich discussion, I think, as everyone's had, which is really exciting. And I think, yeah, we were kind of looking at, and I think it was Karen that mentioned around this idea of looking at disability holistically, and actually moving away from a medical model and a social model. And Karen discussed, I'm sorry, Karen, I'm kind of speaking for you. Did you want to kind of jump in here? I think that was what your point you were saying, and I think it was really interesting.
It was about human rights. Karen, do you want to jump in?
Yes, so my point was, historically we've moved from the medical model to the social model. So the medical model, for those who don't understand it, is looking at the individual as being the person with the issue, is their medical condition. And then the social model then is thinking they're going to overcome these obstacles by changing society. But what we need to do is look at the fact that students have medical conditions. You can't get rid of that just by putting ramps and access into universities. And likewise, the social model as well, it doesn't rectify. So I think we need to completely, like you say, strip it back and start again with a new model, and looking at the human rights of the students. Like, every student has the right to the same learning opportunities as their peers. And that's not just providing a ramp, that's not just providing access to facilities, it's providing them with the same educational experience. So that's social interactions, that's friendships, it's the ability to access, for example, if accessing the student bar, if the student bar is not on the same level as everyone else, they're not going to be able to have the same social interactions as the other students. It's not just having one seat in a lecture room for the wheelchair user to sit in. It's giving them the option to sit where they want and meet new people and have these interactions that other students are having as well. So so some of my work at the moment, I'm trying to create this new model of disability where it takes into account the medical needs of the student, the social model, the human rights model, and looking at the educational model as well, and bringing all those models together to create a diverse model of disability. So yeah, looking at it holistically and not thinking we can categorize into just medical barriers, social barriers. So it's stripping it right back and starting again, basically. Sorry, I go off.
No,
I go
that's
off this
that's
subject,
brilliant, Karen. Thank you. Really important and very insightful work that you're doing. Thank you. We look forward to hearing more about that in terms of where the progress with your work goes. And I think it links into some of the other key points that our speakers, that our group was sharing. And made the point around the importance of the attitude of leaders. And did you want to say just something on that? Because I think that's a key theme that's come out time and time again in the research, and Met has picked it up as well as one of the key things we need going forward after the pandemic from her research. So sorry, Anne, you were talking about attitudes of leaders. Thank you.
In actual fact, it was attitudes of lecturers.
Sorry, yes, lecturers. Apologies.
And, I'm just doing some doctoral research, and my findings showed from the sample who completed my Q methodology survey, found that they are committed, and they are committed to inclusion and disability rights. But there were two camps. There was one group that are confident and ableism aware, and then there was this other camp that were just as committed as they are. They lack confidence, and they feel they don't have the skills, they don't have the time. There's all sorts of restraints that are kind of preventing them from actually providing the approach and the resources that they would really like to.
Thank you. So it's about acknowledging what those barriers are and then trying to break them down in whatever forms, ways that we can, again, with the disabled student in the lead role of that work. And I think it also links into nicely, seamless link into what Sophie was sharing in our group, again, around co-creation and a new resource that's now widely available and fully accessible online, and that's been funded through the Office for Students. Sophie, could you say, if you're still with us, I hope you are, if you could say just a couple of things on that around the digital literacy work that you're doing, because I think that's going to really speak to everybody in this space too. Thank you. Is Sophie still here? Maybe she's had to go. I'm just trying to have a look around.
I was muted. I'm here.
Oh, sorry. Okay, you just did what I do. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, there's a wealth of like a bank of resources relating to a multitude of different topics, whether it be resilience building, feeling good about maths work, feeling good about group work. And what we've been doing at the University of Bradford is specifically looking at positive digital communities. So they're those online spaces that students interact in relation to courses, societies, as well as just peer-to-peer support. So it was a co-created project with 4 master's students. We utilised their expertise and areas that they've been studying, and we've created, I think we've created close to 10 different resources that relate to digital community creation and kind of monitoring and evaluation, and those alongside the Open University of Warwick's resources are now available. They're open access, and hopefully they're applicable to a multitude of different areas that people are interested in. So I'll post the link in the chat, and please have a scroll, have a look, and you can download and edit them as you wish. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. That's wonderful. Katie, was there anything else that, I mean, because there was so much that we talked about, was there anything else that we haven't picked out that we needed to pick out really from our group in terms of your notes? I think I've got most things from my notes, and anything else from our group that you really wanted us to feed back and we haven't?
No, well, no, I think there's so many overlaps with other groups around one thing that was pulled out around the language of reasonable adjustments, and I think as Cara mentioned, how that can potentially end up as a bit of a get-out clause for some universities if they don't have the funding to, so then their reasonable adjustments are much more minimal than other institutions. And then there was a lot of discussion around actually what language would be better or different, or so we had a lot of discussion around that, which was really interesting. And it sounds as though there was quite a lot of overlap. And I think it's one thing that kind of related to what I was saying around that the disabled and neurodivergent students' employability is, if we are working in placements and internships, what role do we play in actually ensuring that the employers that our students go to, or the placements, the organisations, how much are we able to actually ensure that they're able to provide the accessible adjustments and, you know, provide that environment where the student will be able to thrive and feel supported. And I think that kind of, there's so much in that kind of, for me, I want to kind of go away and look into so much, because I think it's so important, you know, like if we can get it right within our institution, and then, as you said, Sue-Ann, I think then look at, okay, beyond the institution, what can we change, and what influence do we have in creating that change as well?
Yeah, excellent. And I think it's that joined up point is a really a core one, and it connects to really what this space has been about today, looking at ecology and the need for a new ecology, and the idea that, I mean, I very much believe this in my own pedagogy and work, that no person is an island, you know, we don't exist in isolation, and we need each other. And it's through that knowledge is born and grows through that interaction and engagement. Francesca, I'm gonna turn to you. Is there anything you want to pull out then in terms of what we've been sharing across the three groups, and thinking ahead to how we want to move forward as a network with this work, with this material that we've gathered and shared?
I think like the work that the groups have been doing, it's amazing, and I'm loving the way in which we have shared and communicated the rich discussions that were in each group. I think we don't really have time to summarize all the points.
I know.
I think what the next steps from here will be, first of all, to stay in touch. So the idea that we have is to create, if you're all okay with it, a mail list, so we can create a group of professionals, academics, researchers, students, practitioners, grassroots organization leaders, that we can carry on with the discussion all together. So that's the first thing.
Yeah.
The second one, Swan and I will collect all the points that have been raised in the groups, and we will put them together, and then we'll share them with you if you want to add, so to create a sort of collective document with multiple voices. There are a few ideas stemming from this. It can be a manifesto, it can be, I don't know, we can have a discussion around it, a toolkit, or let's see what that can become. And thirdly, Swan, I don't know, Swan, if you want to mention the special issue as well.
Yes, I do. Yes, there's been so many chats being posted, which is fabulous. Everyone's really engaging and responding. I did put in a couple of points earlier on at the beginning and halfway through the session today a series of links. I'm just going to post it in again if you've missed it. But those links cover some of the key resources, documents that we've been talking about today. So it's about Disabled Students UK rather, No Going Back report, a link to their Access Insights, a link to their current survey that they're asking for feedback from disabled students across the country. So please share that in your networks and with your contacts and with your students. Also, Francesca and I are putting together a special edition with the journal Educational Sciences, and that's looking at challenges of inclusive education. That's coming out sometime later this year. Francesca, have I missed the key point? There was another point. Back to you.
No. I think
is that it? Okay. Super. So I'm just going to put those points, those web links into the chat, and then I think you'll have it all. Yeah, so it's our special issue, it's Disabled Students UK, and it's also, for those of you that haven't read it yet or engaged with it yet, I've put in there also the link to the BERA blog, which really was a springboard from the BERA blog. The BERA blog is a springboard into this symposium with you all today. So if you haven't looked at it, if you haven't read it, if you haven't engaged with it, please do. I'm sorry, Karen, yes. It is too late to submit an abstract, but I'm very hopeful that we will probably have another form of special issue or another blog or another publication of some sort. And again, we would invite all of you that have engaged with us today to consider submitting for that. Just keep in touch, stay in touch, and we'll send through all the content that Francesca summarised, including the e-list, as soon as possible.
Yeah, Tanya wants to say something as well.
Tanya, okay, thank you.
I would just like to say thank you so much for presenting all of your work, everybody. It really does highlight the importance of our students rather than the importance of the people that are directing the experience of our students. And for me, I think that really shows a really high level of sort of value-based work, really. And I think it's going to be really life-changing for so many of our students, not just as they enter higher education, but as they follow their career pathways out of education and out into the big wide world, which will have an ongoing impact way beyond anything that we could probably ever dream of right now. So thank you so much for sharing your work. Thank you so much, everyone, for being with us. Thank you for having the two SIGs sort of join together to sort of share all this wonderful experience about a word I can't say, inclusion, inclusive practice, disability, thinking about what that means for sort of people more generically, and actually really thinking about holistically about the work that we do and the work of our students. So I really am looking forward to seeing you, all of you that will be there in September. Come and see the work of both SIGs. Hopefully at some point during the conference we'll be able to actually sort of come together and meet and converse and discuss as well. And thank you so much for your time and everybody's contributions this morning. I've had a wonderful time. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure everybody else has as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you.
I think, Tanya, you'd put up a PowerPoint earlier with all of our email addresses and stuff. So if anyone in this group want to get in touch with Francesca, myself, Tanya, or our speakers, if you can share with all the delegates, Tanya, those PowerPoint slides, that would be really helpful. And if we could do that as soon as possible, then we can follow up with everything else thereafter. Thank you so much, everyone. Go and enjoy your lunch or some fresh air, and yeah, and we will carry on the conversation. So I look forward to engaging with you all again at some point in the not too distant future. Superb. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.